Hello, New Covenant Parish. Back with you to talk about another one of this week's readings on our church lectionary calendar. This reading is Psalm 106, verses 1 through 6, and 19 through 23. Actually, you might want to just read the first 23 verses because it all fits. This reading is a complement to the Exodus story about the golden calf that we reviewed last time. You might remember that last time we said that the golden calf story reminds us that the only thing that has sustained humanity's relationship, our relationship with God, has been His patience, His mercy, and His justice tempered with His love. And this psalm takes an honest look at that truth by talking about humanity's constant ingratitude directed toward God, and in response, God's constant grace and patience directed toward us. Despite human sin, note in verse 5, God calls us His chosen ones. But when you look at this reading, pay attention to verse 3, where it says, "Blessed are those who observe justice, who do righteousness at all times." That reminds me that although we receive God's unmerited grace, we're never to take that as permission to not do right. Rather, because God is merciful to us, we have an obligation to make a grateful response to Him by seeking to live a righteous, merciful life before Him and one another. We'll never be able to live that life perfectly, but God's grace, as we remember how deeply it blesses our lives, can keep us seeking, striving to do what is right by one another. But in spite of what we ought to do, the psalm reminds us of our human inclination to be ungrateful and not recognize the many ways our daily lives are blessed by God's mercy. That's what sin does to us. It tempts us not to be mindful of God's gracious presence with us. Talking about sin, as verse 7 puts it, they did not remember your many kindnesses. Or as the New Testament passage would say this, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him. And that's the root of all human sin, to think that we're in control of our lives and can live them just any old way we please, treat each other any old way we please. Every stanza of the psalm drives home the point that human beings fail at living the way they ought to live with God and their neighbors. Read through verses 13 through 18. It's outside our lectionary reading, but read them. Reverend Tim Keller, in his study of the Psalms, notes that no matter how many things God does for them, it doesn't change their hearts, not one bit. Verse 13 talks about their ingratitude. Verse 14, their endless craving and sense of superiority to God. They know what they're doing. Verse 16 highlights their envy and their selfishness. And then, moving to our reading, it says, after the miracles of the Exodus, they made a calf. They worshiped an idol, exchanged the glorious God for the image of an animal, a cow, a bull, and they forgot the God who saved them. And we're no different. Painful to admit, but we're not. The world keeps changing around us, but the human heart remains the same. We talked about this last time with the Israelites' attitude in the desert of, back then you did that, but what have you done for me lately, Lord? Look, when our hearts are tempting us to feel that way for whatever reason, we need to remember this. In the story, Moses turned away God's divine anger against the people's sin in prayer for us. But on the cross, Jesus took the divine wrath against sin on Himself for us. On the cross, God's perfect judgment against sin met God's perfect love for us in Christ. So, whenever we're tempted to wonder if God still loves us for whatever reason, just remember Jesus. Remember the cross. That's what He's done for us lately. And in our relationships with God and one another, Jesus' work on the cross can inspire us to live lives that truly are blessed with patience and mercy and justice tempered with love. We can share with each other. As you read the psalm, folks, remember the cross and give God thanks. Good to be with you today. God bless you all.